all of the metrics on Fantasy Points data support Zay Flowers just with how good he is at getting open, specifically the manufactured targets. You can have Zay Flowers with a ton of these designed manufactured targets. There's so many outs for him to produce. And I referenced Mark Andrews, how the decline we've seen with Mark Andrews, and I get it, Mark Andrews still occasionally can score some touchdowns. There's a lot of Mark Andrews backers there. I get it, he was hurt, but he's on the north side of 30 right now, and you've got Zay Flowers in his prime heading into year 4. Zay Flowers is wide receiver 27 right now in keep trade cut, Heath. I'd argue that's about 10 spots too low. Redraft ends, but Dynasty is life. I'm Theo Gremminger. Welcome to Dynasty Life, joined today by Heath Cummings of CBS. We're going to talk about some Dynasty trades you need to be making right now. Still a lot of football left to be played. We have the conference championship games. But Heath, I always feel like this is an underrated time in Dynasty because you've got everybody locked into actual NFL football. So when you get that little trade offer in your inbox, you're kind of like wired in, not quite into like the hibernation season, and we're not fully into realizing what the value is of your rookie pick season. Senior Bowl is right around the corner, but it's sort of an underrated time of year to get deals done.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's certainly in a lot of dynasty leagues a period of time where you've got half the league that hasn't really thought about their team for a month. And that's not the case right now. So there's either still the thrill of a great postseason run for those dynasty managers, or that sense of regret about how last year went, or excitement about what I'm building for next year. So I do think it's easier to get them done now than it is maybe in late February, early March, and then again maybe in
June. I
June.
think that's an interesting take. Another underrated aspect is this time of year, a lot of times you see new managers coming into established dynasty leagues. I know in FFPC, the dynasty orphans go on for sale, then they'll eventually just slash the price until somebody buys it, and you end up with like 2 or 3 new owners once in a while. Most leagues, usually it's maybe 1 or 0, but are you approaching... Whenever somebody takes over an orphan, do you think there's value to be had in trying to do business with this manager, building long-term relationships, maybe getting a little bit of value on your first deal you make with them?
Oh, right. And I think not even because I'm thinking they're not going to be good at this, but just because every time you take over somebody else's team, there are going to be players on that team that you're just like, I don't really want that guy. What parts can I sell him off for as soon as possible? And you want to be the manager who's been in the league who acquires those guys that the new manager isn't quite as fond of.
Yeah, you always get these very interesting offers coming in from people that take over orphans. A lot of times you'll find these people really, really value acquiring rookie draft picks. Once in a while, you get somebody coming in, really pushing the chips in, and they don't care about their rookie draft picks. Usually that kind of manager might have the wrong approach, but there's value to be had. There's also value to be had with being the first manager to get a deal done with when somebody enters a league. I'm going to talk about orphan strategy in upcoming weeks and sort of ways to build an orphan team correctly. But today we've got to focus in on dynasty buys and sells. Heath, I know you have a number of players you shared with me. We're going to mostly focus in on Heath's buys and sells today. I have a couple of guys. If you want a couple of moves that I'm suggesting, just listen to the previous Dynasty Life. We're going to go over that one. But Heath, you have a very big name at the top here, a player that's been incredibly successful at the quarterback position. But I love that you're starting out with Jalen Hurts. Talk about why he is a target for you as a Dynasty buy.
Yeah, I think like there's a lot of different opinions in terms of like timing the market and whether you can actually do that in Dynasty and finding buy low opportunities. But if you are someone who believes that like the narrative or the vibes can cause a player's value to fall almost entirely by themselves, that's exactly the situation that we have here with Jalen Hurts. Everyone hated the Eagles offense this year. A.J. Brown is unhappy. We've got leaks saying that the players are more willing to criticize Hurts than the front office is. And I think there are probably some people who are influenced by the fact that, well, the Broncos ate Russell Wilson's contract, and we think that the Cardinals are getting ready to eat Kyler Murray's contract and Tua's contract. And maybe that's going to happen to Jalen Hurts too, because a lot of us never thought he was that good in the first place. I've always been a pretty big Jalen Hurts backer. I'll just say, like, this may not be a completely accurate representation of consensus opinion, but looking at Keep Trade Cut, like, that was one of the first names that stood out to me that, like, wow, consensus is really down on him. He's QB 10 in Keep Trade Cut quarterback rankings, which makes absolutely no sense. Like, I don't think he should be outside of the top 5.
I actually, like, when we talked before the show, and I said maybe we'll reference the Keep Trade Cut, but I didn't really check it, like, with a fine-tooth comb. I'm shocked by this one. Just a real quick, very simplistic way of looking at this. Here's your last 5 quarterback points per game finishes for Jalen Hurts. So when he's actually on an NFL field, this is how he scores fantasy points. QB 6 in 2021, QB 1 in 2022, QB 2 in 2023, QB 6 in 2024, and then QB 8 this past season. You're going to say, well, you know, the guy's maybe getting close to the age of 30. He's actually 27 years old, and he'll be 27 to start next season. This one doesn't make any sense. And I would argue that, you know, it's not an anti-Kevin Patullo take, but Kevin Patullo was really, really bad this year at times. Things could get way, way better in Philadelphia this year schematically.
What I think it's at the very least, it is more likely to get better than it is to get worse than what they were doing schematically last year. And I think the other thing is, like, there's this thing where real ball knowers kind of like to tease the fantasy community about how much we like these running quarterbacks, but they're not actually good for real NFL football. And that may have been the case. Guilty as charged on Justin Fields, maybe. I'm afraid that maybe some people look at Jalen Hurts in the same way because, yeah, he gives you fantasy production every year. But the difference between him and Kyler and Tua and all those other guys is they've won like 48 regular season games in the last 4 years. They're a perennial Super Bowl contender. That's not the type of team that looks to move away from a 27-year-old franchise quarterback. It's just it seems like a very, very safe asset that has also produced elite fantasy production consistently. And there's just no reason you wouldn't have that guy as a top 5 dynasty
and the
quarterback.
insulation that you get long-term for holding on to a job when you win a Super Bowl, like that also falls into place. Quarterback 10 makes no sense. And I'll say, like, I understand the market being head over heels with Drake May. Drake May getting pushed up to QB2 in Dynasty. That makes sense. I don't think we need to even dive into it. But when I look at some of these other players, why is Justin Herbert ranked ahead of Jalen Hurts on Keep Trade Cut? That's certainly not what I have in my Dynasty rankings. I get the Caleb Williams enthusiasm. He's 24 years old. But Caleb Williams still hasn't had a season like a couple of these peak Jalen Hurts seasons. Jackson Dart, I get the enthusiasm. You're getting 5 years difference, but he's moved ahead of Jalen Hurts. So I have Jalen Hurts ahead of where Keep Trade Cut has him, which makes him a screaming buy. He's only 1 spot ahead of Bo Nix, 2 spots ahead of Trevor Lawrence. This one feels very, very odd. I completely agree with you, Heath. This is a really, really fun trade target. And when we talk about tiering up, tiering down trade strategy, Jalen Hurts is in that perfect sweet spot that you could move off of a Lamar Jackson type. You could move up from a Trevor Lawrence type and get a player that's been scoring continually every single year. The next recommendation you have to buy, I also had in my moves to make last week. I absolutely love this quarterback that you're recommending heading into into NFL free agency. And this player is going to benefit greatly from a lack of enthusiasm surrounding the 2026 rookie QB market.
Absolutely. Malik Willis is a top 25 dynasty quarterback in my rankings. He's QB 30 and Keep Trade Cut. And I would, like, first off, I'm just pretty excited about Malik Willis. And yes, it was LaFleur's system, and that makes him look better than he probably is. But when he has gotten an opportunity to play the last 2 seasons, he has been extremely efficient, both as a passer and as a rusher. And the larger point, though, is I think there's probably a handful of these guys that we don't know right now in January if they're going to start next year. But if you just take a moment and go and look at the landscape of the NFL and the names of the available quarterbacks, including the rookie class, there are not enough good quarterbacks to fill all of the spots. There are going to be several guys in January that we don't know if they're starting that are going to be starting next year. And Willis, with the rushing profile, actually gives you an opportunity to maybe you get a high-end QB2 season out of him. Maybe he probably gets a Justin Fields-like deal, I would guess, but maybe he's actually good in that first year and gets the second or third year.
Yeah, I love the take. And he's 26 years old, so there's some real value to the age plus the profile where NFL teams are going to look at him as maybe a bridge quarterback, maybe a 2-3 year bet, but one that has upside. Malik Willis came out of Liberty, was supposed to be drafted earlier, ended up being a third-round pick, sort of fizzled out of Tennessee, ends up in Green Bay, and we saw it. We saw it in Week 17, what he's capable of fantasy football-wise. Just with his mobility, Heath, he's going to give you QB2 production. I don't think there's any real chance that if he gets starts, he's going to fail as a fantasy football asset. So I love this one.
Right.
Let me ask you, we're hearing a lot of like rumors that this Green Bay wave, starting with the general manager, we got Jeff Havley taking over as head coach. Malik Willis is going to continue that trend, and they're going to sign him as their quarterback. A number of people sort of buying into this narrative. I know there's a bunch of other rumors for Willis, but if he ends up in Miami next to Devon Achane with Jalen Waddle as his number one wide receiver, how do you like that fit?
I love it. I think it now let's
That's
see
right.
what the system is. Let's see who's calling the offensive plays, and then we'll know if we really love it. But no, it makes sense from a variety of different angles. And I think in that situation, we're probably ranking him around QB 16, 17, 18 going just for next year, going into next year. And everybody thinks he's a top 24 dynasty.
Yeah, I think that's a great way of looking at it. And Miami has the 11th overall pick, where they could very well go with one of these wide receivers, maybe potentially a tight end there. It feels like it could be a skill position pickup at 11. So, yeah, I love Malik Willis. I think that's a really, really strong recommendation. There's one player on the list here that I was a little surprised to see as a buy, because when we talk about day 3 running backs, there's always a little bit of a danger with them. Now, Jacory Croskey-Merritt ends up with 800-plus rushing yards, 8 touchdowns, but it felt like a wild swings. It wasn't like a clean journey for him. It was him not scoring when he's not in your lineup, and then maybe scoring a bunch of points while he's on your bench. But you like buying Jacory Croskey-Merritt. Is this just if he survives the wreckage of the offseason, he's in a great spot and he's cheap? Or is this I want the profile, the market's down on him type guy?
Probably more of the first. I think like that we haven't quite reached the post-hype portion of Jacory Croskey-Merritt season, but we're rapidly approaching that. If they draft a running back on day 3, then it will probably just be completely over. Yeah. We'll fall in love with that guy instead. But I think I don't want to buy day 3 running backs in year 2 or even year 3 really when they're really expensive. And one of my sells we'll talk about kind of fits into that category. But when they're cheaper, and it's a guy who was really as good with the ball in his hands as believers thought he would be. The problem was, as Cliff Kingsbury said multiple times throughout the season, it's when the ball's not in his hand, we have a hard time playing him. Well, he gets an entire offseason now with Washington. And this is an offense that's going to be pretty desperate for playmakers, I think, going into next year. They'll probably draft somebody. They'll probably sign somebody. But he is a playmaker with the ball in his hand. And so if I can make a cheap bet on a guy like that, and if he figures out some of the other stuff, pass protection being a big one, and gets to play 60% of the offensive snaps, he could be a top 15 fantasy running back. And now I can buy him for RB3 costs, looking at keep trade cut, like the guys, he's just behind Rico Dowdle and Tyler Allgeier. He's just ahead of Chuba Hubbard and Kenneth Gainwell. Like that's a pretty cheap range for running backs. You're not having to give a lot to acquire
I think that the problem a lot of people will have is you're going to have to dodge bullets in free agency and in the NFL draft. But I think it's a very interesting take because he's not going to cost a whole lot. I mean, Jacory Croskey-Merritt for a third-round pick, I think, is out there in most leagues right now. And when you look at JCM or Bill or whatever you want to call him, those issues where he couldn't get on the field at Arizona because of the NCAA issues, really sort of a lost season. He regained a lot of value at the Shrine Bowl and then a ton of steam this past summer. So that's a really, really interesting one. Jacory Croskey-Merritt, if he survives the wreckage, you're also going to get Jaden Daniels back fully healthy. And Washington needs to embrace younger players at the skill positions. You know, it's just
Right.
They had this weird use a bunch of old guys with Jaden Daniels, and I think that's going to change this offseason with a number of moves they make. Heath, what does a week look like for you? Where can people find your work? What are you putting out podcast-wise, article-wise? You're always a busy guy over at CBS.
Yeah, this time of year, it's a lot more podcasts than articles. Just did a Superflex startup mock yesterday on FFT Dynasty. I record that on Tuesdays and Fridays at 11:30. We've got our regular FFT show that's still going 3 times a week, even in the off season at 10 a.m. in the morning. It's on YouTube, anywhere you can find podcasts. And then about once a month, I update the Dynasty rankings this time of year. I'll do some mailbags, getting ready to do an episode next week with John Bosch for commissioners. So like people who want to start a new Dynasty league. I've played in a lot of leagues with a lot of different commissioners. I've never had a Dynasty commissioner that was better than John Bosch. And so I like to kind of pick his brain about what new things he's doing in his
best advice for Dynasty commissioners is make people pay next year's entry when they trade future picks, so you don't try to fill an orphan with no rookie picks and no monetary compensation to offer somebody. That's always going to be a fun one. Make sure you check out all Heath's work. Heath, we're not talking about the 2026 rookie class, but bird's eye view, starting to get excited. Is there anybody that you've got your eye on? Collective thoughts on the class, just any sort of thoughts you have on this upcoming rookie class?
Yeah, I think like individual players, I don't know that I have a lot of hot takes at this point, but I do think we've spent a year and a half now talking down this 2020-26 class and talking about how we'd rather just skip and add 2027 picks instead. And so I think if there's a way to take advantage of that, I do still think there's going to be a pretty great top 6. Maybe it's a top 5 after I get done with all my research. Maybe it's a top 7. But if somebody's undervaluing those mid first round picks, I'd be trying to acquire those. And I'm pretty okay with giving up everything after that.
I love that take. And I think we'll eventually have some more solid rookie draft tiers. A lot of it needs to be decided by the NFL draft, but we'll eventually have like post Senior Bowl. I think we get a lot more information on some of these guys. And I'm of the opinion that the running back class is just so beat up by the community. A couple of these guys are going to emerge, and there's going to be guys that end up going on day 2 that we're interested in. I don't think it's going to be disaster after Jeremiah Love. Love that sort of information. I'll say pay attention to Heath's rookie takes when he drops them. I know last year you were all over Harold Fannin Jr., made some big Harold Fannin Jr. bets pretty much on every Dynasty show you were on. He ended up hitting in a major way. So pay attention to Heath when he starts dropping those ones. I'm sure you're going to have some good rookie content coming up down the line. But let's keep talking about our veterans that we're looking to buy and sell. This player and all of his teammates just got a little bit more expensive. I'm seeing a ton of takes. I'm also creating a lot of takes saying Mike McDaniel is going to lead Omarion Hampton to this glorious rookie year 2 season. I know Ryan Heath's also on that train. I mean, that one's pretty cut and dry. Running backs just put up fantasy numbers under Mike McDaniel, Raheem Mostert, Devon Achane. Then you're going to get a million positive Justin Herbert takes. You're going to get a million Aronde Gadsden takes. And then you're going to get a bunch of Ladd McConkey bounce-back seasons. Quentin Johnston is your recommended buy here. And I like this one because even last year when he was scoring a bunch of points, there were still dynasty managers sort of trying to fade things. Of course, he faded away a little bit, but it's a very interesting asset considering that he's heading into his 4th year as a pro. We've already seen him put up a bunch of spike weeks with Justin Herbert, and now we're getting this potential massive philosophical change in LA.
Yeah, I think the funny thing about it is like the Chargers have, and I joke about this on our podcast all the time, so apologies for you guys who listen to both and are hearing this again, but like every single year for the last 5 years, the Chargers are the NFL media's dark horse favorite to go win the Super Bowl. Everybody loves the Chargers. Everybody loves Justin Herbert. Everybody loves Amari Hampton. Nobody loves Quentin Johnston. He was the butt of more jokes than he was anything else early on in his career. The hands have been improved in year 3. And the funny thing is, like, you think of him going into his 4th year, he's 2 months older than Ladd McConkey. Like, this is a very young player who has shown, at the very least, great chemistry with Justin Herbert in the end zone. And he's shown an ability, like, I think sometimes people discount some of his big plays because defenders seem to make more mistakes against him than they do other receivers. I think that is a positive trait of Quentin Johnston, that defensive backs continue having a difficult time staying with him. And so I think Ladd McConkey is probably going to be better than Quentin Johnston next year. I don't know that for sure. You got a new offensive coordinator. You got a very explosive player in Johnston, and Mike McDaniel loves explosive players. So one of these guys is going to be viewed as a number 2 wide receiver. One of them is currently wide receiver 41 on Keep Trade Cut. If I'm going to buy into this offense, I don't know how in the world you would buy Omari and Hampton right now. Maybe you could buy Ladd at a little bit of a discount, but you're getting a significant discount on Johnson.
Yeah, I love it. And it's 16 touchdown catches in his last 29 regular season games, averaged 11.7 points per game in 2024, and then averaged 12.2 points per game in 2025. He's 24 years old. So, and when we also factor in the first-round draft capital that the franchise used on QJ, he's just an interesting player because I think there's always a disconnect between the production he puts up on the field and the value that he has in the trade market, and people just want to look for ways to avoid him. There's going to be plenty of people making Trey Harris arguments this offseason, potentially even over QJ, when QJ was well ahead of him for the entire season as well. So I think this is a really interesting one. I also have a wide receiver heading into year 4 that I'm going to share in a couple of minutes. But let's talk about a bounce-back candidate for you. You've got some older guys on the sell list, but you've got a over the age of 30 wide receiver that the market was head over heels for last season, and now there's a significant dip. Much like Bill, you're chasing another commander here with Terry McLaurin.
Yeah, I'll be honest, that doesn't feel great having multiple commanders on the buy list. But I do think, listen, Jamie Eisenberg was all over this during training camp and staying away from Terry McLaurin because what do these contract holdouts can do to players early in the year. And McLaurin came back from the contract dispute and struggled through injuries in the first half of the season. But if you look at what he did this year, just basically after he got healthy, it wasn't that much different than what he did last year. And I had Terry McLaurin as a sell last offseason because what he did in 2024 wasn't actually that much different than what he did in 2023, except that he scored a whole bunch of touchdowns. And I just don't think I generally, when you talk about a wide receiver, is 29, 30, 31 years old. My general guiding light is if they show us a decline, then we should believe it. I don't really look when I see Terry McLaurin healthy at a big decline last year. I think he's still the same guy. I think he's still going to be the number 1 wide receiver on this offense. I don't think he's at an age yet where we have to expect him to fall off of a cliff. He's got a nice contract as long as he stays healthy that he's probably going to get to play on for a couple of years. And he's fallen to wide receiver 48 after he was a top 30 wide receiver a year ago. So it seems like a pretty good cheap buy that could give you wide receiver 2 production for the next couple of years.
I think it's a really interesting one, and I think a year ago he would have cost you exponentially more than he's going to cost you right now. It's just like last year we wanted every piece we could get of the Washington Commanders offense, and now everybody's lost value. Terry McLaurin is down at wide receiver 48 on Keep Trade Cut. Another shocking valuation. And I get it, the guy's 30 years old, but he came into the league late. And Washington just paid him last offseason, so he has contract insulation. I'll throw out a couple of names that are ahead of Terry McLaurin right now. Josh Downs is ahead of him, which I get it. Josh Downs has flashed a lot, but certainly we like the role for McLaurin heading into next season over Downs' role. Troy Franklin is ahead of him. DJ Moore is ahead of him. Jaden Reed ahead of him. Matthew Golden is almost 10 spots ahead of him. So you've got a lot of like theoretical fantasy scoring numbers for guys ahead of him. And instead of Terry McLaurin, who could easily, if everything clicks next year and the offense bounces back to where they were in 2024, you could talk about a 15-point per game season from McLaurin as Jaden Daniels' number one target. So I like this one. And they also promoted internally with the OC. They went with David Blau. So they didn't go outside the organization. So there's the familiarity with F1, with McLaurin there. So I like this one. I think it's a low-hanging fruit at that low-end wide receiver 4, and that's certainly not where I have Terry McLaurin ranked, and I know that's not where you have him ranked, so we're able to sort of get a little bit of market value out of that one. The next player you're listing is a really fun one because this player is heading into free agency. I mean, Isaiah Likely, we were waiting for years for like the shoe to drop and for him to take over from Mark Andrews and the Ravens to move off of Mark Andrews. In fact, it's the opposite. They pay Mark Andrews for whatever reason. I wonder if that new head coach is going to love that decision, Heath, to go with the older tight end there on the decline. But that's neither here nor there. Isaiah Likely is a natural pass catcher who I think there's a lot of people in the fantasy community just waiting for him to get that opportunity.
I think it's so strange to me because I think like you said, we've spent 2 or 3 years ranking Isaiah Likely in Dynasty just based on the potential that he was going to have this opportunity, that it's now there. Like, we don't know where he's going to sign yet. It's still possible. It's a bad landing place and we're just not excited. Somebody else sees him as a tight end too, or something like that. But most likely we're finally there. No pun intended. And the ranking hasn't moved. In fact, he may be just a little bit lower. Looking at Keep Trade Cut, he's behind Mason Taylor, Brenton Strange, Jake Ferguson. And I think if he signs with the Falcons and replaces Kyle Pitts in Kevin Stefanski's offense, he's a top 6 tight end. If he signs with the Chiefs and replaces Travis Kelce, he's a top 6 tight end. Like, there's multiple outs to where Isaiah Likely just turns into somebody that everybody views as not only a must-start tight end, but a must-have tight end in Dynasty for the next 4 years. And right now, it's like the market, it's almost like the quarterbacks that are going to be starting that we don't know it for sure yet. And the market's just too low.
Yeah, I'll throw out a couple of other scenarios. The Washington Commanders, who we were just talking about with all this cap space, taking over for Zach Ertz and a younger target, like we talked about getting some of these younger 25-year-olds in with Jaden Daniels instead of a bunch of 30-year-olds. I'll throw out the Cincinnati Bengals, who this is sort of their MO, is they go into the transfer portal every year. They sign a different free agent tight end. Maybe they stay within their division, get Isaiah Likely, and we have him in a Joe Burrow offense. There's a million scenarios here where Isaiah Likely could land well. And I think at his current valuation, even if he just ends up back in Baltimore with Mark Andrews aging, I'll throw out one more fun one for you. How about he signs with San Francisco on a 1-year deal and we get him in the George Kittle role until Kittle can come back? I mean, I think people get excited about that one too. So I'm an Isaiah Likely truther to the point where people sort of make fun of me for this one. But I'll say that when you watch this player catch a football and some of the plays that he has in his highlight reel, it's hard to believe that there's not a bunch of franchises out there that don't want to make this a full-time player in a full-time role. I think he could help a lot of passing games. So I love that one. I'll share 2 of my buys here. One player is another current Raven, and this is a player that I think I'm going to be trying to get in all formats all offseason long, and that's Zay Flowers. Flowers this year, 1,200 receiving yards, career high, 14.3 points per game, career high. But the target volume, it was very similar to what he's had every year of his career. 108 targets in 2023, 116 in 2024, and 118 in 2025. The touchdown totals have also been low for Zay Flowers. He's had 5 or 4 touchdown catches in every season of his career. So for me, it feels like a player where, with the coaching staff changing in Baltimore has been such a low volume passing offense that even if they become like the 10th, they've been the first or second fewest pass attempts every year under Monken. If that number turns into like the 10th fewest. It'll be a middle of the pack to low, but a little bit of improvement in the overall target volume. I think that Flowers is going to explode. Or he just gets a little bit more lucky, maybe he's a little bit more fortunate when it comes to scoring touchdowns, and we end up seeing him with like an 8 or 9 touchdown season. There's so many outs for a player of his talent and explosiveness. All of the metrics on Fantasy Points data support Zay Flowers just with how good he is at getting open, his ability to really on the deep targets, on the close in targets, and also specifically the manufactured targets. You could have Zay Flowers with a ton of these designed manufactured targets. There's so many outs for him to produce. And I referenced Mark Andrews, how the decline we've seen with Mark Andrews, and I get it, Mark Andrews still occasionally can score some touchdowns. There's a lot of Mark Andrews backers there. I get it, he was hurt, but he's on the north side of 30 right now, and you've got Zay Flowers in his prime heading into year 4. Zay Flowers is wide receiver 27 right now in Keep Trade Cut, Heath. I'd argue that's about 10 spots too low.
All right, full agreement from me on basically. Can I just say I endorse everything Theo just said? He was one of the guys when I was going through and looking for the dynasty buys that I almost put on the list. So, fantastic player. It's not the same situation as Philadelphia where we just are very confident the system will not be worse. It'll probably be better because I think the system was good. The offense has been good in Baltimore, but what you hit on is exactly right. The pass volume is significantly more likely to improve than get worse. And I don't think Zay Flowers' target share or air yard share is going anywhere. He's going to be elite in that regard, and just a small bump to slightly below average in terms of team pass volume turns him into a superstar.
One other buy that I'm recommending is Tyler Allgeier. This is a player that's been continually running as a backup running back behind Bijan Robinson ever since Bijan came into the league. Mm-hmm. But if we go back to Tyler Allgeier's rookie season, back in 2022, he had the 1,000 rushing yards in 16 games played. That was a season where over the second half of the year, he really, really helped fantasy managers. Then when you look at what he's been able to accomplish alongside Bijan Robinson, he's been able to carve out a role under multiple offensive coordinators where he has received touches in an offense despite playing next to arguably the league's most talented back. So for me, Tyler Allgeier, there's a lot of starters that are going to be on the move this offseason. A ton of these guys like the Travis Etiennes, the Javonte Williams, J.K. Dobbins types, where these guys have started games in the league. They're going to be free agents. But I think ultimately the market is going to value Tyler Allgeier very strongly. He seems like the kind of back that a lot of teams will be interested in. He's 25 years old, and I think he could be a player that could really, really thrive in a committee role. And there's also a chance that he could just land in a situation where they give him the number 1 role. I think coaches are going to value Tyler Allgeier. I know Raheem Morris always spoke very, very glowingly about Tyler Allgeier. He was a big favorite of Arthur Smith's as well. There's been multiple coaches that just have seemed to gravitate towards his style of running back. When I also factor that in with the age, I think he's a very interesting dynasty trade target right now.
Yeah, and probably someone that you like more in a non-PPR or half PPR league than you do in a full PPR league. Because I think even if he is the number 1, he's probably coming off the field on a lot of passing downs. There's so many people I think that are hoping the Chiefs draft Jeremiah Love, and I think there's probably too many holes for them to do that. But Allgeier would be that if they decide to go a little bit cheaper at running back and not commit quite that many resources, he'd be the great hammer in Kansas City, take over that Kareem Hunt role and handle the Pacheco work. And I think he could really thrive there. I think maybe if he's the guy that goes and is the early down back and Jaylen Warren goes back to third downs in Pittsburgh, maybe something like that makes sense. But yeah, I could see him having a couple of RB2 seasons.
Yeah,
for sure.
Those are great landing spots. There's a number of them. I've actually thrown out Jacksonville, where if ETN moves on and they want to embrace Spatial Tootin, maybe use a little bit of Quint Allen, maybe Allgeier steps in there. There's going to be a bunch of these roles. Maybe Detroit moves off of David Montgomery. They go with a younger back with like an Allgeier. Chicago could potentially cut DeAndre Swift. There's a lot of these committee backfields where we say committee. There's so many backs that are in committees now that we're using in fantasy.
Yes.
But just getting away from Bijan Robinson would be a net positive for Tyler Allgeier. There's really no other back besides like Christian McCaffrey that's as scary for taking away like potential outs for Allgeier than Robinson. So he's a really, really fun one. Let's talk about your sells. And these ones are always like, sometimes this time of year, it's the uncomfortable sells. Names that have scored points for you for many years, maybe a guy that spiked up this season, but that's where the value is. And moving off of a guy before the bottom falls out, that's Dynasty 101. Who do you want to start out with today, Heath?
So this one's probably not too uncomfortable for people because I don't know that anyone's decided that Sam Darnold is a great fantasy asset, but in a super flex league, he looks like, man, he's in the NFC Championship. He's got a contract for a couple of years. He's still relatively young as a quarterback. He might just be a good QB2 for the next 5 years. I think it's highly unlikely they're going to have the same offensive coordinator next year because he's probably going to be a head coach somewhere. But I do think that their head coach is going to demand that whoever they hire as offensive coordinator really commits to the run like they did this year. I think you probably get another low volume Sam Darnold season. This year, there were several stretches where he made up for that with just an insane efficiency. Like, and I don't mean insane because it's Sam Darnold and he's not that good. I mean, like any quarterback in the NFL averages 9 yards per attempt and has an 8% touchdown rate. We're telling everybody they're not going to be that good next year. You just don't repeat that. And he is also, I think, and I'm sure Seahawks fans want me to continue doubting Sam Darnold, at least until they win the Super Bowl. I still think he could turn back into a pumpkin in the middle of next year, and you've only got 1 year as a starter. I think there is fake insulation there with Sam Darnold right now, where it seems like things are going so great in Seattle and the offense is so efficient. And I've probably got a QB2 for the next 3 to 4 years. And I don't think there's any guarantee.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting take. And I think that's when you ask people, what do you like about Sam Darnold as a dynasty asset? They're going to tell you it's the insulation. He's got the starting position on a good team in Seattle. And look, they're in the NFC Championship game. The guy's taken 2 teams to playoff appearances in back-to-back seasons. But the Clint Kubiak loss could be a massive one. Kubiak led this team to just a dramatic turnaround this year offensively. The offensive line was completely lights out. Everything sort of fell into place. But you're having already some turnover with the personnel. Zach Charbonnet, lower body injury that's going to keep him out for a torn ACL there for Charbonnet. That's going to keep him out 6 to 12 months. We don't know the severity of it, but I would guess that he's going to miss most of next season. Then you add in Kenneth Walker is an impending free agent. Rashid Shaheed, who has been so important for this team, especially what we saw last week in their big playoff win. But Shaheed they acquire at midseason. He's a free agent. I think they want to bring him back. But the big loss would be Clint Kubiak, who's unbelievable. Right. Hey, how about Clint Kubiak to, I guess I could call him almost your Las Vegas Raiders at this point because you're all hyped up about the Bowers-Genti-Mendoza combination. I think Clint Kubiak with Mendoza, Bowers, Genti, I think he could figure things out.
That, I think I would assume that all these teams just want to wait and find out if he will come be their coach. He should have the pick of pretty much whatever he wants. And you're right. He's done a phenomenal job. He made Derek Carr look like an all-pro quarterback for about a quarter of a season or a half of a season last year. And so I do think that drop-off at offensive coordinator is going to happen just because there's just very few people in the world that are as good at doing that as he was this year. And while you were talking about all these injured and free agent Seahawks running backs, I was just thinking, man, if you want your buy to really be right, let's send Tyler Allgeier to the Seahawks.
Yeah, no, that one sounds good to me. The one running back you have coming up, this is one where I've talked to people sort of behind the scenes, and I ended up selling a Bucky Irving share on an FFPC contender last year, and I was able to get Chase Brown and what turned into a high second-round pick this year. That felt like it was printing. Bucky Irving is a polarizing one, though, Heath, where you talk about Bucky Irving to some dynasty managers, and they want to push him into like the Devon Achane, Jonathan Taylor realm. Then there's others who, like myself, say, like, what are we doing here? Another player who the Buccaneers lost Liam Cohen, Josh Grizzard let go of. They tried to get Mike McDaniel. We're not sure who the OC is going to be there. But I think it's just a fundamental, is Bucky Irving one of these elite assets that should be ranked as an RB1 in Dynasty? Or is he somebody who maybe should be ranked as like a mid to low end RB2? That's a huge margin for trade valuation.
Absolutely. And it's funny that you mentioned that trade that you make, because even after what we just saw in this past season, Bucky Irving's still 4 spots ahead of Chase Brown on keep trade cut. So like he held that value, even though if you look at the large portion of last year and you look at yards before contact per attempt, you look at yards after contact per attempt, he was behind both Sean Tucker and Rachaad White in both of those metrics. That doesn't really make any sense because we all think he's a better rusher than those guys, but it was a down year, and it's a day 3 running back that we've talked about the risks that are inherent with those coming off of a down year, and somehow he's still at RB10 in consensus value. And I think the great thing is he is a very polarizing running back, but what that means is that in most leagues, there are 2 or 3 people who think that Bucky Irving belongs in that RB1 conversation. And there's probably 2 or 3 people in every league who think no. So you're going to have to be selective with who you shop him to. You're going to have to find the Bucky Irving managers in your league. But there are people in almost every league who still believe this is a definite dynasty RB1. I think he's a dynasty RB2 who has a glass floor. Like at any moment, the team could just decide, you know what, we need to invest a little bit more.
Yeah, and with Rachaad White heading into free agency, Sean Tucker, I believe, is a restricted free agent, so he potentially could be gone, potentially could be back. For me, Tampa Bay is going to probably dive into the draft class, draft a running back. They hit on Rachaad White. They hit on Bucky Irving. They could end up with another interesting running back in there. Bucky Irving certainly had a little bit of trouble bouncing back from injury this year. It was a player that they never put on the IR, and fantasy managers were like, oh, maybe Bucky will be back this week, maybe he'll be back this week. And then it took forever for him to come back. And then there was really uninspiring usage when he came back versus what he had early in the year. So I don't like that. I get that he's 23 years old, but I think that's sort of people are overrating the fact that he's 23, where there's running backs that are a little bit older that I feel like I can make a Bucky Irving trade and end up with a better asset for 2026 and potentially a better asset for 2027. I'll say this one, James Cook is ranked as running back 8 on keep trade cut. Bucky Irving is running back 10. If you're telling me that I can give you Bucky Irving plus a little something and turn into James Cook, I'm doing that all day long. You referenced Chase Brown.
100%.
Chase Brown's RB13. You said 3 spots below. How about the old guys? Christian McCaffrey at 29, Saquon Barkley at 29. I get that those guys are older, and a lot of people will hate this recommendation. But if it's simply I'm chasing a title in 2026, both those guys are interesting to me. I'm personally of the opinion I think Barkley has a better year next year. The volume from 2024 kind of caught up to him this year. I think it'll be a little bit better next year, just a bet. But I think there's many ways you can kind of manipulate the trade market with Bucky Irving tearing up or tearing down.
Well, and I think the nice thing about him is that, within his range at running backs, there are options to do both. And at his stage of his career, I don't really think anybody that's got a young build that's maybe just starting to move into a contending window should be thinking that Bucky Irving's a young running back who's a safe guy to add to that. But there are people who will look at him that way, people who believe that his talent is so great that, of course, he's going to have a job for the next 4 years. And he's young enough that they can believe that. So it keeps the market open in terms of who you could trade him to. And you've got options ranked in the same area where you can tier up or down pretty easily.
Yeah, very, very interesting one right there. I'm going to lump these next two sort of into one big trade sell recommendation from you. You've got 2 of the greatest scorers in the history of fantasy football here, Heath. People are not going to like you saying this one. Derrick Henry, who just won everybody the money in Week 17, and then Davante Adams, who led the NFL in touchdown catches. Both of these guys are sells for you.
If we just keep saying that Derrick Henry is an old running back that you should be selling in Dynasty for 5 years in a row, it's eventually going to be true, right?
Maybe
he'll just
maybe he'll be 40. Maybe he'll be 40 and he'll just fall in the end zone 10 times.
But if you think about it, like if you're a dynasty manager who just won a championship with Derrick Henry, and I did last year, I didn't. My Derrick Henry team did not win it this year, but the gift that he just gave you as a now 32-year-old running back to finish December like he seemingly always does and be that elite league-winning option gives him a value that I don't think a 32-year-old running back's ever had in dynasty fantasy football. Like, you can still sell him as somebody that can help somebody else go win their championship next year. You don't get, like, almost always with guys like this, with guys like Kelsey, we've seen Kelsey's value just completely fall off the cliff the last 2 or 3 years of his career. Generally, when you decide to keep a running back past age 30, you're just saying, okay, I'm going to let him retire on my team. And I think if you ask Derrick Henry managers in the middle of last season, they thought, well, it's happened. Like I've lost that value and I'm okay with it because he's been awesome for so long. But no, he went out and maybe won you a championship, or at the very least reinflated his value for the 7th time at the late stage of his career. And I think you can still actually get something for a 32-year-old running back who is great and has defied all of our expectations in his 30s. But Father Time is still undefeated. And as far as Adams, like, he is a great scorer still, but most players that have the season like he just had, I think we'd generally be saying what words? The touchdown regression. Like, the Rams are probably not going to throw the ball inside the 5 more to Davante Adams than they do anything else next year. Maybe they will. Maybe they'll do it a second year, but that's not the way Sean McVay's really functioned. He usually finds a cheat code within a given season and just exploits that cheat code until the NFL adjusts. This year it was 3 tight ends and Davante Adams in the red zone. So I think both of those guys have given you an opportunity to sell them for more value than you can generally trade players at their age, and you should take advantage of it.
I think that it's really just falling back on age apexes, guys falling off, even when it becomes to a special player like this. And when we get to Derrick Henry, like, defying the odds at 30, defying the odds at 31, the sample size for 32-year-olds, 33-year-olds, it just gets smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller. If you can still squeeze out a significant package for him, I think that there's an argument to be had. For a lot of managers, you might get boxed out here. And I think it's Heath saying to sell high, essentially, not just selling to sell here. If you can't get a trade done, I think you just sit on it, and you might be more valuable selling Derrick Henry after a month of the season next year than this offseason. But again, every league is different.
100%. Like, yeah, I mean, if he has to retire on your team, I don't think anybody should feel bad about that. But if you can sell high, I think go make the move. I would not expect to get as much value for Adams as I do for Henry. I mean, he played 14 games this year and he had 789 receiving yards. That is not Davante Adams. And Puka is obviously still going to be the guy there. I think I would be less surprised by him scoring 7 touchdowns next year than I would be 14 again.
Yeah, he's definitely an interesting one. Again, one of the all-time greats. It never feels good to get these kind of guys off your roster. But hey, if you time it correctly, nothing feels better than trading away an asset before you're talking about guys at this age, if they start to decline, their value can go to absolute 0 in Dynasty.
Right.
So take a consideration for just kicking the tires, see what you can get on those guys. Davante Adams is still a near wide receiver 3 valuation. He's at wide receiver 37 on Keep Trade Cut. You've got an interesting name as your final sell recommendation, and this is a player that steamed up big time at the beginning of the season and then fell back to earth over the second half of the season, also dealt with a number of sort of being banged up injuries. Odunze, who's valued at wide receiver 16 on Keep Trade Cut, which some people will hear that and say, wow, that's way too high. Others will say, you know what, that makes sense. Talking about a young guy heading into year 3, top 10 pick in the NFL draft, and he's going to Ben Johnson offense. You've got Odunze as a sell.
Yeah, I don't have Rome Odunze as my highest ranked Bears wide receiver in Dynasty. I've got Luther Burden a couple spots ahead of him. And I think about like your buy low, Zay Flowers. That's a pretty significant gap between where those two guys are ranked. Flowers has been significantly better. And I think it's more likely that Flowers' situation is going to improve next year than I do for Odunze. There's something, and it may get resolved, but there's something that's just not quite right there with he and Caleb Williams. You mentioned it. The first month of the season, he scored a touchdown every week, was really the big story. Like, he had one game over 70 receiving yards, but he scored a touchdown every week, scored 2 in one game. Everything looked awesome. Since that point, he had 2 games the rest of the season with more than 53 yards receiving. Like, it was just a fun, and it was right after the bye. So I don't know if it was an intentional decision. But I think Luther Burden is ascending. Colston Loveland is ascending. And I hope Rome Odunze is, but it feels like it's being ranked as if he is more of a sure thing than he actually seems after 2 years in the NFL. You love the top 10 draft capital, but a guy that has top 10 draft capital is supposed to have at least an 800-yard season in his first 2 years in the league. He's not supposed to have a 50% catch rate, where some of that's Caleb Williams. We know that he makes 3 or 4 wildly inaccurate throws per game and 3 or 4 wildly awesome plays per game. But some of it is, and we saw it in this most recent playoff game, the ball hitting Rome Odunze in the hands and him not catching it.
Yeah, this is an interesting one, but I think based on if your league mates are valuing Rome Odunze, where KTC has him at like that wide receiver 16-ish range, completely agree with you. This is a player that if I can actually tear down to an asset like Flowers, and who scores more points next year? Zay Flowers, in my opinion. And it's also a potential that you're holding Chicago's number 3 most targeted player next year, which seems crazy to say, but Colston Loveland is my tight end 3 in Dynasty now. And Heath, we saw him have a 15-target game in the NFL playoffs. Caleb Williams certainly doesn't have a problem targeting Colston Loveland. Then you've got Luther Burden, a full offseason under his belt. And Burden is the kind of profile that has thrived under Ben Johnson when we see like the slot usage, all that kind of stuff. So I think you're making a really strong case to move off of Odunze, despite the feeling that maybe you're selling low on him in some leagues. I don't know if that's necessarily going to be the case. I think he could settle in as the 3rd best pass catcher in a very good Chicago offense. Most of the time when you have the 3rd best pass catching option, it's not that great for your dynasty portfolio. So I think that's an interesting one. I also think he's an interesting, if you're looking to sort of restart the clock, can I turn Rome Odunze somehow into one of these rookie wide receivers that are upcoming in this 2026 draft class? Can I use Rome Odunze and something to get myself in a situation to draft a Jordan Tyson, to draft a Makai Lemon or a Carnell Tate? Is that somehow in the wheelhouse to package up for those picks, then just sort of restart this whole process? I think that's an interesting way about going about it as well. So really, really fun one today. Heath, you shared a ton of buys, a ton of sells, very generous with your time. Let everybody know once again what you have coming out.
Yeah, I'll have FFT Dynasty on Friday. I've got the Couch Scouts coming on. We've got a rookie special. We're going to talk about the rookies we think are going to be drafted in round 1 of the NFL draft. Kind of break down Mendoza and Love and those wide receivers you just talked about. And, of course, the one tight end that everyone is expecting. And so, yeah, we'll do that at 11:30 Eastern on Friday.
Yeah, highly recommend all of Heath's work. Make sure you're sticking with us here at Dynasty Life. If you're listening to this on the podcast, make sure you are now subscribed to Fantasy Points Dynasty YouTube. We've added a ton of subs, dropping some awesome video content over there. It's our latest YouTube channel, and we're going to have great guests like Heath on all off season long. We'll see you soon.